Christmas Eve, 2024. The dining room was full, glasses raised, lights warm. My name still carved above the door, Rice Family Kitchen, since 1997. Marcos stood in the center and smiled. This place finally became profitable when we stopped running it like the 90s. People laughed. He went on, talking about 18% growth, expansion, independence. What he didn't mention was the $1.9 million wired from the Rice Family Trust in March of 2021. 36 months, 14 days past maturity. I didn't interrupt him. I didn't defend myself. I simply looked at the ledger book from 1997 sitting on the shelf behind the bar. And I did the math in my head. 2 weeks later, the board convened. And the clause he signed, without reading twice, was ready to wake up. Welcome to Final Act Revenge, ladies and gentlemen. Please note, this story contains fictionalized elements created for educational and entertainment purposes. If you're listening tonight, tell me where you are and what time it is. And please, take care of your health. Drink some water. Don't let pride keep you up too late. Because that Christmas was only the beginning. My name is Charles Rice. I turned 68 last spring. I started cooking when I was 19 and broke and sleeping in the back of a diner outside Dayton, Ohio. By 1997, I had saved just enough to lease a narrow brick building in Columbus. 12 tables, one fryer that rattled when it ran, a second-hand grill that burned hotter on the left side. That first year, I worked 16 hours a day, not because I loved ambition, because I owed suppliers money, and I refused to let my name collapse before it even stood up. We called it Rice Family Kitchen long before it was a family. I painted the sign myself. Crooked letters, too much varnish. In 2003, we opened a second location. In 2008, I almost lost both. The banks tightened credit. Sales dropped 29% in 6 months. I remember sitting at my desk staring at payroll and thinking I might have to lay off people who had trusted me since the beginning. I did not. I refinanced my house instead. That was the year my daughter Hannah stopped asking if I would make it to her school events. She already knew the answer. Success did not arrive like fireworks. It arrived like rent paid on time, one steady check at a time. By 2016, we had 6 locations across Ohio. That was when my attorney Martin Sloan said something that changed everything. "You need protection," he told me. "Not from strangers, from uncertainty." So, we formed the Rice Family Trust. 62% ownership transferred into it. I remained trustee alongside Martin. It was not about hiding money. It was about continuity. If something happened to me, the business would not fracture under pressure. In 2018, Hannah married Marcos Pierce, MBA, confident, sharp dresser. He believed in branding and data dashboards and growth curves. I believed in margins and people and patience. When I offered him the CEO position in 2020, he hesitated only long enough to appear humble. "I won't let you down," he said. Then the pandemic hit. Revenue fell 43% in 3 months. Dining rooms empty, staff frightened, vendors impatient. Marcos paced my office. "We need capital. Fast." The trust provided $1.9 million in March 2021, structured as convertible rescue capital, 36-month maturity, 4.2% interest, standard clause. If unpaid, the principal converts to additional controlling equity. Marcos signed, quickly. We were fighting survival, not debating pride. The business stabilized, slowly. But stabilization is not repayment. By late 2023, sales were climbing again. Marcos talked about modernization, streamlined suppliers, lean staffing, expansion into 2 suburban corridors. He told the board we were reborn. He did not tell them the trust had not been repaid a single dollar. When March 2024 passed, The maturity date moved from abstract to factual. 14 days later, it became actionable. I did not rush. I watched. Because leadership is not volume, it is timing. And timing was approaching. The year after the rescue capital went in, the numbers began to look impressive. Marcos loved presenting slides, clean graphs, blue, upward arrows. He would stand at the head of the conference table and say things like, "We're up 18% year over year." The board would nod. Some of them smiled. I did not. 18% growth sounds solid, but growth is a story, and stories depend on what you choose to include. One afternoon, I walked through our Easton location without telling anyone I was coming. I have always preferred to see a place unprepared. You learn more that way. The dining room looked polished. New menu boards, brighter lighting, smaller plates. Yes, smaller plates. I asked the line cook, a young man named Eli Torres, how things were going. He hesitated. "Busy, sir," he said. "But we switched vendors, cheaper cuts, different supplier. Different supplier means different terms. Different terms mean different risks." Later that week, I reviewed the vendor aging report. Average payment delay had moved from 30 days to 74. That is not modernization. That is borrowing time. When I mentioned it in passing, Marcos leaned back in his chair. "It's strategic cash management," he said. "Everyone does it." "Everyone eventually pays," I replied. He smiled, not disrespectful, not quite, but dismissive. At the next board prep session, Denise Carter from the audit firm joined us. Calm voice, neutral tone. She was not there to accuse. She was there to verify. She asked simple questions. "Are deferred payables increasing faster than revenue?" Marcos answered quickly. "We're optimizing liquidity." Denise did not argue. She just wrote something down. A week later, she requested additional documentation. Lease obligations, supplier renegotiations, payroll adjustments. Payroll adjustments. That phrase bothered me. I visited another location 2 days later. A server I had known since 2012 pulled me aside near the storage hallway. "They changed our insurance tier," she whispered. "Same hours, less coverage." That is when the taste in my mouth changed. Profit is earned, reputation is guarded. But employee trust, that is protected. That evening, Hannah called me. "Dad, please don't make this about control," she said. "Marcos is trying to scale responsibly." I asked her one question. "Has he shown you the cash flow forecast?" Silence. In the following audit draft, Denise presented preliminary findings to the board. No fraud, no embezzlement, no illegal transfers. But there was a pattern. Revenue growth had risen, yes. Yet a significant portion of the margin improvement came from delayed vendor payments, renegotiated health benefits, and postponed maintenance upgrades, legal but not sustainable. Paul Everett cleared his throat during the review. "What happens," he asked calmly, "when the deferred obligations mature simultaneously?" Marcos folded his hands. "We'll outgrow the gap." Confidence is admirable. Arithmetic is indifferent. I went home that night and opened the original ledger book from 1997. Handwritten entries, flour costs, utility bills. Every supplier paid within 30 days, even when I had to refinance my house to do it. Different era, different pressures. But the principle had not changed. Denise sent one more note before the full report. Projected shortfall, if expansion continues at current pace, $2.7 million within 8 months. $2.7 million. Not theft, not scandal, just gravity. And gravity always wins. I closed the email and looked at the calendar. The trust clause had already matured. The audit had not finished. And for the first time since Christmas, I knew the numbers were about to speak louder than pride. Pressure does not arrive loudly. It gathers in spreadsheets and in silence. 2 weeks after the preliminary audit draft, Denise Carter requested a deeper liquidity review. Not dramatic, just thorough. Marcos called it routine compliance. I called it friction. During the executive meeting, he leaned forward, palms open. "We're positioned for scale," he said. "Vendor flexibility is part of that strategy." Vendor flexibility. That was a generous phrase for 74 days past due. Denise adjusted her glasses and spoke carefully. "The concentration risk is increasing. If 3 major suppliers tighten terms simultaneously, available cash drops below operational threshold." Operational threshold. That meant payroll. Marcos did not flinch. "We're negotiating extended lines." I noticed he did not say approved. Later that afternoon, I drove to our oldest location in Westerville, not to inspect, to observe. The kitchen felt different, not broken, not chaotic, just thinner. Portion sizes slightly reduced. Sauce recipe altered to stretch inventory. Managers rotating overtime to avoid triggering benefit tiers. These are small changes, but small changes multiplied across 6 locations become policy. Eli Torres caught my eye near the prep station. "Sir," he said quietly, "suppliers are asking for revised payment schedules. Some are nervous." Suppliers become nervous when confidence shifts. Confidence shifts when numbers whisper something leadership refuses to hear. That evening, I received a message from Martin Sloan. "The trust conversion window remains open. Execution does not require audit conclusion." Legal precision, no emotion. I stared at that sentence longer than I expected. Conversion meant control. Control meant public acknowledgement that Marcos had miscalculated. Hannah called me an hour later. "Dad, people are talking," she said. "They think there's an ownership dispute." "There is a governance process," I replied. She exhaled slowly. "You always sound calm when you're about to do something decisive." She knew me too well. The next board prep session felt heavier. Paul Everett asked for a forward projection under conservative assumptions. Denise presented 3 scenarios: base case, optimistic, stress test. In the stress test, if vendors tightened terms to net 30 and expansion costs remained fixed, cash reserves would fall below safe levels in 7 months. 7 months. Marcos crossed his arms. "That assumes worst-case behavior from partners who have worked with us for years." Paul looked at him steadily. "Markets don't owe us loyalty." That line hung in the air. After the meeting, Marcos followed me into the hallway. "You're positioning the board against me," he said quietly. "No," I answered. "I'm positioning the company against risk." His jaw tightened. "You built this with instinct." "I'm building it with data." I did not raise my voice. "Then respect the data fully." For a moment, I saw it, not arrogance, fear. Fear of being remembered as the son-in-law who lived under inherited stability. Fear of stepping out of my shadow and finding sunlight too bright. That night, Denise sent the revised liquidity projection. 2.7 million potential shortfall within 8 months if expansion continued and deferred payables normalized. Not hypothetical, mathematical. And then Martin forwarded a formal notice template, prepared but unsigned. Trust conversion declaration. All it required was my authorization. The audit was not finished, but the clock had already expired. And for the first time since Christmas, the question was no longer whether the clause existed. It was whether I was ready to pull it. There is a difference between knowing you have leverage and choosing to use it. I drove to the office early that morning before anyone else arrived. The dining room lights were still off. The sign above the entrance reflected faint streetlight across the glass. Rice Family Kitchen, since 1997. Inside my briefcase was the trust agreement, tabbed, highlighted, dated March 14th, 2021. $1.9 million. Convertible rescue capital, 4.2% annual interest, 36-month maturity, automatic equity conversion upon non-payment. No ambiguity, no loophole. Marcos had not repaid a single dollar of principal. Not one. I sat in the conference room alone and read the clause again. Not because I doubted it, because execution should never be emotional. When Hannah arrived, she looked at the folder on the table and then at me. "You're thinking about it," she said quietly. "I'm evaluating timing," I answered. She folded her arms. "If you convert the note, you humiliate him." "No," I said. "The numbers will." Her eyes searched my face. "Do you want to win? Or do you want the company stable?" The question was fair and uncomfortable. Later that afternoon, Marcos walked in tired, carrying projections for the next quarter, confident, focused. He did not know Martin had already drafted the formal conversion notice. "We're close to a breakthrough," Marcos said. "Another 2 quarters and we'll clear the remaining pressure." "On what cash position?" I asked. He slid a spreadsheet toward me. Projected vendor normalization phased over 6 months. Expansion loan restructured. Bonus pool reinstated in year 2. He was planning beyond the maturity date. I tapped the page gently. "You're assuming trust," I said. "We are family," he replied. Family does not cancel contracts. It complicates them. That evening, Martin called me. "If the trust does not act," he said evenly, "it signals that the clause is symbolic." Symbolic clauses encourage risk. Risk compounds quietly. I went home and opened the old ledger book from the first year. Every expense handwritten, every payment tracked. No deferrals, no strategic stretching. Different era, different scale, same principle. At 9:30 that night, I received another email from Denise Carter. Supplemental sensitivity analysis attached. If 3 major vendors shortened payment terms to net 30 within the same quarter, the projected shortfall increased to $3.1 million. 3.1. Not dramatic enough for headlines, but sufficient to destabilize payroll confidence. I closed my laptop and sat in silence for a long time. This was not about revenge. Not yet. It was about structure. The next morning, Paul Everett called a preliminary executive session. "We need clarity," he said. "Either the trust intends to exercise rights, or it doesn't." Marcos looked directly at me across the table. "You're not going to pull the trigger," he said. "Not over timing." Timing. I remembered the exact date on the document, March 14th, 2021. Today was April 2nd, 2024. 18 days past maturity. "Would you pull it?" I asked him calmly. He hesitated just long enough. "If I were you, I would wait." Waiting is a decision. So is action. That afternoon, I asked Martin to prepare the conversion notice for presentation at the next board session. Not to file it yet, to prepare it. Marcos left the building unaware. Hannah stayed behind. "Dad, please think carefully," she whispered. "I always do," I said. What she did not know, what Marcos did not know, was that the audit finalization was scheduled 48 hours before the board vote, and once those numbers were printed in black ink, waiting would no longer be neutral. The audit report arrived on a Thursday morning, sealed in a plain white envelope. No drama, no sirens, just numbers. Denise Carter requested that the executive team gather at 2 in the afternoon. Not a board meeting yet. Internal first. Marcos walked in early. He looked composed, calm, almost relieved. "You'll see," he said to me quietly. "We're stronger than you think." I nodded. Strength is not measured by optimism. At exactly 2 o'clock, Denise began. "Final liquidity review as of March 31st, she said. Adjusted for vendor communications received in the past 10 days. Vendor communications. That phrase tightened something in my chest. She projected the first slide. Accounts payable aging had shifted. 3 primary suppliers, Midwest Produce, Franklin Meats, and Coastal Dairy, had formally reduced payment terms from net 60 to net 30, effective immediately. No negotiation window. The room went quiet. Marcos leaned forward. They wouldn't do that without notice. They did, Denise replied evenly. Written confirmations received Monday. I watched his jaw move as he recalculated in real time. Shortened terms meant accelerated cash outflow. Combined exposure now required 1.4 million additional liquidity within 60 days. 60, not theoretical, not projected, actual. Paul Everett spoke carefully. Is there sufficient buffer? Denise paused. Under current burn rate? No. That word does not shout. It lands, no. Hannah shifted in her seat. I could see fear in her eyes, not for ownership, for stability. Marcos turned to me. This is temporary, he said. We can negotiate. Have you called them? I asked. He hesitated. Not yet. That hesitation told me more than any spreadsheet. After the meeting, I asked Eli Torres to join me in the smaller office near the kitchen. How are staff hearing this? I asked. Rumors, he said honestly. Some managers are nervous about payroll consistency. Payroll. Confidence at the employee level evaporates quickly once rumors circulate. That evening, Marcos came to my house unannounced. He stood on the porch longer than necessary before knocking. When I opened the door, he did not speak immediately. They blindsided us, he said finally. They responded to risk, I answered. He stepped inside. If you convert the trust now, you confirm their fear. Fear spreads when leadership appears divided. And if I do nothing? I asked. You give me space, he replied. Space. He wanted time. Time costs money. I walked to the dining table and placed the trust agreement between us. March 14th, I said quietly. You signed this understanding the maturity date. I assumed flexibility, he said. Assumptions are expensive. For a moment, the confident executive disappeared. I saw a man who had gambled on momentum. I'm not reckless, he said softly. I'm trying to grow what you built. I built it slowly, I replied. You accelerated it. Growth is not wrong. But speed without cushion fractures. The following morning, Denise emailed an additional note. 2 vendors had requested personal guarantees for future credit extensions. Personal. That meant risk transferring from company to individual. Marcos did not forward that email to the board. He forwarded it only to me. Let me fix this, he wrote. That was the first crack in his certainty. Later that day, Paul Everett called an emergency board session for Monday. Agenda Item 3. Trust Capital Conversion Discussion. Marcos found out within the hour. He called me immediately. You're forcing this, he said. I'm acknowledging it, I replied. There is a difference. That night, I reviewed the employee payroll schedule. 48 families, depending on stability. 48. When leadership argues, staff feels it first. On Sunday evening, Hannah texted me. He hasn't slept, she wrote. Neither had I. Monday morning would not decide everything, but it would decide direction. And direction, once chosen publicly, rarely reverses. When I walked into the building before sunrise, Marcos was already there, standing alone in the dining room, waiting. The dining room lights were still dim when I stepped inside. Marcos was standing near the far window, hands in his pockets, staring at the empty tables. He turned when he heard my shoes on the tile. You came early, he said. So did you. For a few seconds we just stood there, 2 men connected by family, separated by numbers. I need 1 more quarter, he said finally. 60 days, I replied. That's what the vendors gave you. That's not enough to stabilize perception. Perception. Interesting word. Perception doesn't pay invoices, I said quietly. He exhaled hard, frustration leaking through the calm exterior. You always talk like the numbers are moral, he said, like math has character. Math has consequence, I answered. That hit him. We walked into the boardroom together. Denise Carter had already arranged the final audit summary on the table. Paul Everett sat at the head, silent, measured. Hannah took her seat near the wall, hands folded, eyes tired. Martin Sloan joined by speakerphone. Legal voice. No emotion. Agenda item 3. Trust conversion discussion. Paul cleared his throat. Given current liquidity conditions, we must address the maturity of the Rice Family Trust convertible note. He looked at me. I nodded once. Denise projected the revised figures. Accounts payable compressed to net 30. Projected shortfall 3.1 million within 8 months if expansion continues. Payroll vulnerability within 90 days under stress scenario. Silence followed. Marcos leaned forward. This assumes worst-case contraction, he said. We are negotiating revised credit terms. With personal guarantees? Paul asked calmly. That stopped him. Denise didn't raise her voice. 2 vendors have formally requested executive-level personal backing. I saw it then. Fear. Not of losing authority, of losing control of the narrative. If the trust converts now, Marcos said slowly, it signals instability to staff and suppliers. If the trust does nothing, I replied, it signals tolerance of risk beyond agreed structure. The air felt heavier. Hannah finally spoke. Is there another option? There always is. But options require humility. I slid a document across the table. Conditional conversion proposal. Not full displacement, not removal. Structured oversight. Board-appointed financial controls. Expansion freeze. Mandatory cash reserve threshold. Executive bonus suspension until principal repayment. Marcos stared at it. You drafted this, he said. Yes. You planned to replace me. No, I said evenly. I planned to protect the company. He stood up. For 3 years I've carried this growth strategy. I negotiated leases. I built supplier relationships. I expanded footprint. And deferred accountability, I said. His voice rose slightly. You want control. I want solvency. Paul Everett intervened gently. This proposal retains Marcos as CEO under financial governance supervision until trust principal is reduced below 50%. That was the twist, not removal, restriction. Marcos looked at me as if seeing me for the first time. You'd rather cage me than cut me, he said. I'd rather give you a framework than watch you gamble again. The room held its breath. Denise spoke quietly. This structure would reassure vendors immediately. Martin's voice crackled through the speaker. The trust reserves the right to full conversion if conditions are violated. Marcos ran his hands through his hair. You don't trust me, he said. I trust that pressure distorts judgment, I answered. He sat down slowly. How much principal must I repay to lift oversight? He asked. 1 million, I said. Not symbolic, substantial. He laughed once, not amused. You're asking me to earn back authority. Yes. That was the shift, not punishment. Proof. Paul called for a preliminary vote to adopt conditional conversion framework pending formal execution. 4 in favor. 1 abstention, Marcos. The decision wasn't final yet, but the direction was public. He stayed seated long after the others stood. When the room emptied, it was just the 2 of us again. You think this will make me stronger, he said. I think it will reveal who you are, I replied. He didn't answer. He just nodded, slowly. And as I walked out of that boardroom, I knew something had changed. Not ownership, power. The board vote did not end the tension. It redistributed it. By Friday, the conditional conversion framework was public inside the company, not a press release, not gossip, a structured memo drafted by Martin Sloan and reviewed by Denise Carter. Oversight committee established, expansion paused, executive bonuses suspended, minimum reserve requirement enforced. Marcos signed the acknowledgement line without ceremony, but signatures do not quiet pride. The first week under supervision felt different, meetings shorter, decisions documented, cash movement reviewed daily. He adjusted quickly on the surface. He canceled 2 pending lease negotiations. He met personally with Midwest Produce. He promised revised payment schedules. On paper, progress. In reality, pressure building. One afternoon I walked through the original Columbus location, the one we opened in 1997 with borrowed ovens and second-hand tables. Eli Torres stood beside me near the counter. "Staff feels calmer," he said quietly, "knowing there's structure. Structure comforts those who depend on stability, but leadership rarely enjoys being monitored." That evening, Hannah called me. "He barely speaks at home," she said. "He thinks you humiliated him." "I preserved his position," I answered. "You limited it. Limitation is sometimes mercy." 2 weeks later, Denise forwarded an updated liquidity summary. Reserves stabilizing. Accounts payable compliance improving. No new vendor contractions. A modest recovery. Then the unexpected arrived. An email from Coastal Dairy's regional director. Subject line, contract review clarification. Inside, a note stating that their earlier term reduction had been triggered not solely by payment aging, but by concerns raised during a private conversation with Marcos about aggressive expansion forecasts. Forecasts that assumed projected revenue increases not supported by current store performance. Forecasts that had circulated beyond the company. That was new. Not a collapse, but a revelation. Marcos had pitched future scale externally before internal solvency was secured. Ambition leaked outward. I did not confront him immediately. Instead, I requested Denise confirm the timing of those communications. 3 weeks before the audit draft, before vendor tightening, before oversight. Sequence matters. When I finally spoke to him in the office late one evening, the building nearly empty, I placed the printed email on the desk between us. "You were promising numbers we didn't yet have," I said. "They were projections," he replied quickly. "To external partners," I said. Silence followed. "I believed we would reach them," he said. "Belief does not replace capital." He rubbed his forehead. "You think I was reckless. I think you were trying to prove you didn't need me." That landed harder than accusation. He didn't deny it. For the first time since Christmas, his voice lost its edge. "I can't live under your shadow forever," he said. "I never asked you to," I answered quietly. The room felt smaller. Ambition and insecurity are twins. One drives growth. The other hides risk. Over the next month, he began something I did not expect. He sold his secondary investment property in Dayton, liquidated a personal brokerage account, transferred $400,000 toward principal reduction voluntarily. No board requirement yet. Personal decision. That was the first real shift. But redemption does not arrive in one transfer. It tests endurance. Then came the blow. Franklin Meats filed a formal notice of accelerated payment due to missed internal compliance documentation, a technical violation triggered before oversight fully stabilized. Payment demanded within 30 days, $1.2 million. 30 days. Reserves were not yet strong enough. The room felt colder when Denise presented it. Marcos didn't argue. He looked at the number. "I caused this," he said quietly. "Not to me. To the board." For a moment, I saw him standing where I once stood decades ago, facing consequences of expansion that outpaced foundation. This was his lowest point. Publicly accountable, financially exposed, authority conditional, family strained. He looked at me once, not with defiance, but with something closer to resignation. "If I can't solve this," he said calmly, "you should convert fully." There it was, not ego, surrender, and in that silence, I had to decide whether to let him fall or let him fight. When Franklin Meats delivered the acceleration notice, the air shifted. Not panic. Wait. 1.2 million due in 30 days because of a compliance clause triggered before oversight tightened. Technical, legal, binding. Denise Carter projected the cash flow timeline again. Even with Marcos's $400,000 principal repayment, reserves would dip below safe level within 3 weeks. Paul Everett leaned back in his chair. "This is decisive," he said quietly. Marcos didn't look at anyone. "I'll fix it," he said. Not defensive, not proud, just steady. "How?" Paul asked. Marcos finally lifted his eyes. "I'll restructure the Dayton property sale proceeds. There's still escrow margin. I can redirect another $200,000. "That's not enough," Denise replied calmly. He nodded. "I know." That evening, he requested to meet Franklin's regional director in person. Not a video call, in person. I did not attend. For the first time since oversight began, I stayed back. Hannah came to my house that night. "Are you going to convert fully?" she asked. "Not yet," I answered. "Why?" "Because surrender is easy, recovery is harder." The next morning, Marcos returned from the meeting with Franklin. He looked exhausted, but different. "They'll waive acceleration," he said quietly. "How?" Denise asked. "I offered a performance-backed repayment schedule, personally guaranteed by asset collateral." "What collateral?" Paul asked. He hesitated, then answered, "My remaining retirement account." Silence, not theatrical, real. That account represented his future security. "You didn't need to do that," Hannah whispered. "I did," he said. That was the turning point. Not for the board, for him. Denise confirmed the amended agreement. Acceleration suspended. Structured repayment reinstated over 90 days. 90, breathing space. But the story did not end there. 2 days later, Coastal Dairy sent a revised communication. They were restoring net 45 terms, conditional upon quarterly transparency reports from executive leadership. Transparency. Oversight had become leverage. Martin Sloan forwarded a brief legal note. "With vendor posture improving, trust conversion remains optional but no longer urgent." Optional. That word felt lighter than it had in months. During the next board meeting, Paul asked Marcos directly, "Why didn't you ask the trust for emergency capital?" Marcos answered without hesitation, "Because I signed the note, and I haven't earned the right to ask for more." That was new, accountability spoken without resentment. After the meeting, I walked with him through the quiet dining room again. "You were ready to let me fall," he said. "No," I replied. "I was ready to let you decide who you wanted to be." He looked at the old framed photo on the wall from 1997, me standing beside a rented oven, sleeves rolled up. "You built this slow," he said. "Yes, I tried to outrun that." "You tried to impress it," I corrected gently. He smiled once, tired but honest. "I don't want to outrun it anymore." Over the next 6 weeks, he executed what he had promised. Additional principal repayment totaling $600,000. Expense discipline enforced. Expansion formally frozen for 12 months. Public staff town hall meeting explaining liquidity stabilization. He stood in front of 48 employees and said the words clearly. "I overestimated growth. We're correcting it." No blame shifting, no defensiveness, just ownership. Eli Torres later told me morale improved after that meeting, more than after any financial memo. Truth restores trust faster than spin. But redemption is never linear. On the final day of the quarter, Denise delivered the updated liquidity report. Reserves stabilized. Accounts payable current. Trust principal reduced below 1 million. That crossed the conditional oversight threshold. Paul looked at me. "It's your call," he said. I felt the weight of 3 years in that moment. Full conversion would end ambiguity. Partial restoration would test growth under restraint. Marcos met my eyes, not pleading, not demanding, waiting. And as the board prepared to vote on lifting conditional oversight, I realized the final decision would reveal more about me than about him. The boardroom felt different that morning, not lighter, but clearer. No crisis slides, no emergency emails, just a single agenda item, conditional oversight review. Denise Carter summarized the quarter calmly. Trust principal reduced from 1.9 million to 980,000. Vendor terms stabilized. Cash reserves above required threshold for 45 consecutive days. No new expansion commitments. Measured progress, not dramatic. Paul Everett turned to me. "The conditions for lifting oversight have been met," he said. "We need direction." Direction. Marcos sat across the table, hands still, shoulders squared, not defiant, not submissive, present. Hannah watched quietly from the corner seat. I folded my hands on the table. "When the trust converted conditionally," I began, "it was not to remove leadership. It was to restore structure." No one interrupted. "I do not believe leadership is measured by speed," I continued. "It is measured by endurance." Marcos held my gaze. "I also do not believe redemption should be symbolic," I said. "It must be earned." Paul nodded slightly. Denise waited. "The trust will not execute full conversion," I said evenly. "Conditional oversight will transition to quarterly financial review only. A controlled release, not complete freedom, not permanent restriction." Marcos exhaled, not loudly, but enough. "But," I added, "executive compensation remains suspended until principal is fully repaid." There it was, balance. Leadership restored, financial accountability maintained. Paul called for a vote, unanimous. Oversight formally reduced. Marcos remained CEO. Trust retained convertible authority until full repayment. After the vote, he did something unexpected. He stood. "I want to say something on record," he said. No script, no spreadsheet. "When I pushed expansion, I believed momentum could substitute for margin. I was wrong." He paused. "I didn't ask for help because I didn't want to appear dependent." Silence. "That nearly cost us stability." He looked at me directly. "I'll finish repaying the trust, not because I'm forced to, but because I signed it." No theatrics, just truth. Later that afternoon, we held a company-wide meeting in the main dining hall. 48 employees, managers, kitchen staff, servers. Marcos spoke first. "We hit strain, we corrected course, we're stable." He did not blame vendors. He did not mention my oversight publicly. He simply acknowledged growth must follow foundation. When he finished, Eli Torres stepped forward. "Are jobs secure?" he asked plainly. "Yes," Marcos answered, "and expansion will wait until reserves justify it." Applause came slowly, but sincerely. Confidence does not return with noise. It returns with clarity. That evening, after everyone left, I walked alone through the kitchen, the stainless steel counters, the old oven from 1997 still in the storage room, the framed photo near the entrance. Marcos joined me quietly. "You didn't crush me," he said. "That wasn't the objective," I replied. "You could have." "Yes," he nodded once. "I won't forget that." I looked at him carefully. "Don't remember the restraint," I said. "Remember the lesson." He smiled faintly. Margin before momentum. Exactly. 2 weeks later, he transferred another 200,000 toward principal. Steady, deliberate, no announcement, just progress. And as I drove home that night, I realized something had shifted permanently. Not ownership, not control, respect. But redemption is never declared by a vote. It's proven over time. And time is the only auditor that never relaxes. Time softens what pride once sharpens. 3 months after the board vote, the dining room felt steady again. Not booming, not fragile, just steady. Marcos continued the repayments exactly as promised. Small transfers, consistent, documented. 980,000 became 700. 700 became 5. No shortcuts, no dramatic gestures, just discipline. He no longer talked about expansion during family dinners. He talked about inventory cycles, about staff training, about supplier relationships built on transparency instead of projection. Hannah seemed lighter too. For the first time in years, she did not look caught between loyalty and leadership. One evening she asked me quietly, "Do you still see him as a risk?" I thought about that. "No," I said, "I see him as unfinished." That is different. Risk hides weakness. Unfinished reveals potential. 6 months later, the trust principal dropped below 300,000. Marcos insisted on accelerating repayment after selling another personal asset. I did not ask him to. He did it because he wanted the obligation closed with dignity. The final transfer happened on a quiet Tuesday morning. Denise Carter confirmed receipt before noon. Principal repaid in full. No conversion executed. No forced takeover. No broken family. Just accountability fulfilled. That afternoon I called a short board session. "Effective immediately," I said, "the Rice Family Trust convertible clause is retired." Paul Everett smiled for the first time in weeks. Marcos did not celebrate. He simply nodded once. Later, when we stood alone in the hallway, he said something I will not forget. "I thought strength meant independence," he said. "It actually meant restraint." I placed my hand on his shoulder. "Strength means knowing when to slow down." We never erased what happened at Christmas. The words he said in that crowded restaurant still exist in memory. But memory does not have to define destiny. Sometimes the deepest revenge is not removal. It is restoration under conditions. Looking back now, I understand something clearly. Leadership without humility becomes fragile. Growth without margin becomes dangerous. And family without respect becomes transactional. If you are watching this, and you've ever been underestimated by someone you love, remember this. Do not rush to destroy. Do not rush to surrender. Build structure. Demand accountability. Leave room for change. That balance is harder than revenge, but it lasts longer. Thank you for staying with me through this story today. Please tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is where you are right now. I always find it meaningful to see how far these stories travel. And if you've made it all the way to the end, rate this story from 1 to 10. Your feedback truly helps me craft stronger and more meaningful stories for you. Please note, this story contains fictionalized elements created for educational and entertainment purposes, meant to encourage reflection and discussion. If this story moved you even a little, consider subscribing to Final Act Revenge. Another story is waiting for you right on your screen. YouTube believes you'll enjoy it.